order, please. The Committee of the Whole House on Bills will come to order. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, could you please call Bill 127, the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia Act?
Call Bill number 127, the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia Act.
Madam Chair, this act was referred back from the Law Amendments Committee without any amendments, and it has 7 clauses.
Shall Clause 1 carry? Shall the remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, could you please call Bill 119, the Cosmetology Act?
Now call Bill number 119, the Cosmetology Act.
Madam Chair, this was also referred back from Law Amendments without any amendments and has 71 clauses.
Shall Clause 1 carry? Shall the remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, could you please call Bill 107, the Debt Collection and Management Reform 2012 Act?
I call Bill number 107, the Debt Collection and Management Reform 2012 Act. Before, I understand that in law amendments there have been some amendments approved, and before I ask the clerk to read those changes, would the committee prefer to go straight to consideration, or would you like those changes read? Read? Okay, clerk.
Let's wait.
Proceed to consideration. Thank you.
Madam Chair, there were eight changes made, and this bill has 46 clauses. There is a change sheet available for any members who don't know what the changes are and would like to see them.
Thank you. Shall Clause 1 carry? Shall the remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, would you please call Bill 102, the Education Act?
Now call Bill number 102, the Education Act.
Madam Chair, Bill 102 was referred back from Law Amendments without any amendments and has 5 clauses.
Shall Clause 1 carry? Recognize the Honourable Member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We have a number of amendments we'd like to try to present, and think maybe we can probably put all 4 of them up if possible, just for everybody to share. It'll save us a little bit of time of passing it out for the pages. I do have one for the first clause, so I don't know if we want to
consider that first.
Consider that one first. Madam Chair, the first one that we'll be getting, which is PC-1, revolves around the issue of the definition of bullying. We were finding that it was still a little open to interpretation. Maybe it wasn't as strong as we feel, or even the people that did come present to the Law Amendments Committee tried to present to us. So, Madam Chair, under the first clause, and of course remembering clauses after the 1 to 5 is clauses 2 to 6, it pretty much reads like this. Subsection 3-1, or 3 bracket 1 of chapters 1 of the Acts of 1995, the Education Act, as amended in Chapter 11 of the Acts of 2000, Chapter 16 of the Acts of 2005, and Chapter 37 of the Acts of 2010, is further amended by adding immediately after the clause the following clause. And this is sort of the meat of it anyway, which is AA. Bullying means any direct or indirect behavior, comment, act, or gesture, including those made through the use of social media, intended to injure, hurt, oppress, intimidate, or ostracize, and include cyberbullying by subsection I, a student against a student, teacher, support staff, or volunteer, or II, a student, teacher, support staff, or volunteer against a student. And then adding another clause of M, of inappropriate student behavior, including bullying, gender-based violence, and incidents based on homophobia. So, Madam Chair, if I could call on you to see if we can get some consensus on maybe amending the bill to include this one. Thank you.
Recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to point it out that on Bill 102, which we're currently dealing with, that we, our caucus, the official opposition, did present a number of amendments on behalf of our education critic, the honourable member for Colchester North. As is the regular process, those amendments unfortunately were voted down by the government members of that committee. Therefore, we did not see the need to bring those amendments again at this stage, having seen the reception that they received at law amendments. And while I do wish my good friend, the House Leader for the PC caucus well, I would assume that he will have the same level of success with his amendments that we had with our amendments. But at the end of the day, Madam Chair, this was an opportunity for the government to strengthen the issue of bullying in this province, which has been very topical and on the minds of Nova Scotians. And I certainly want to commend again our member for Colchester North for her leadership and her work on trying to strengthen this legislation and listening intently to both students and parents and teachers and everyone involved in the education system on this. Again, it's unfortunate that the government once again is refusing to listen to any of the amendments being brought forward by the opposition.
The motion is that the committee consider amendment as submitted CWHB PC 1. All in favor say aye. Those opposed nay. The motion is defeated. Shall clause 1 carry? Carried. Shall clause 2 carry? Yeah, I think it got, that's where I was confused. Thank you. So it wasn't just me. I recognize the honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, and I do apologize for maybe some listing to be a little bit out of order here. So we all look at Committee Whole House on Bills PC-3. This one is a change to Clause 2. And this one really speaks to the issue of anti-bullying activities. So, of course, support for pink days and other activities that would go to try to support organizations that are trying to curb anti-bullying activities across Nova Scotia. I think they're pretty much self-explanatory, except for the part where it says principals shall support any group of students within their individual schools that wishes to conduct activities the principal of that school considers conductive, reducing, preventing bullying and inappropriate behavior. Also, when it comes to 6.4e, which is in addition to Clause 3, actually, the school board, I gotta stop there. Who organized these for me? All right, so we'll call this one PC-3-1 because we're gonna have to come back to that one in a second.
To be clear to the mover, we have changed sheet CWHB PC-3.
Right.
And it is only that
First
part
clause here.
pertaining to Clause 2 that you are moving.
Correct.
So the motion is for amendment to Clause 2 as presented in CWHB PC 3 pertaining to Clause 2 only. All in favor say aye. Oh, I recognize, before we proceed, I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Chair, would the committee just entertain a very brief recess just to check, and to check into this. It's, we agree it's in order and everything. That's not the issue. But if it would hopefully be less than 5 minutes.
Is it agreed? Agreed. We will take a few moments recess. The Honourable Government House Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the indulgence of the committee for allowing us to go into recess, and we've caucused, and thank you.
Thank you. Okay, to be clear for the record, the motion is for an amendment on Bill number 102 as submitted on CWHB PC-3 pertaining only to Clause 2. All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is defeated. Shall Clause 2 carry? Carried. Shall Clause 3 carry? Recognize the honourable member for Argyle.
Well, as much as I, understand the move on the first one, this one is still continue on PC-3, which was the second clause under Clause 3. It was sort of a complementary clause to go with the support for anti-bullying activities. So I'll move, I guess, what we'll call PC-3-2. Whatever you want to call it.
One moment, please. I want to refer to the clerk on order process. Thank you. Due to the fact that this change sheet is reflecting an addition after Clause 3, we'll proceed with consideration on Clause 3 and then proceed with this change sheet. Shall Clause 3 carry? Carried. Recognize the honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much. So rewind what I said last time, which is PC-3. So we'll do that one. Then I have a couple of other ones which are relate also to Clause 3. So we'll do the PC-3 remainder, and then I'll present the other two and try to put them together as best I can.
So to be clear, this is PC-3. Okay. The motion is for an amendment to Bill 102 as presented in CWHB PC-3. Adding a Clause 4. All in favor? Opposed? Nay. Motion is defeated. Recognize the honourable member for Argyle.
All right, I'm going to put the next two together. So PC-2 and PC-5, because they sort of, PC-2 and PC-4. Because they do also go together in one way or another. The amendments that we'll see under 4, I'm just trying to which one goes first. So the PC-2 basically is to work or to strengthen the guidelines and penalties when it comes to bullying and/or cyberbullying, to identify what those behaviors are, and to give a clearer picture of how these things happen and how not only does the school system deal with them, but also the actual legal system, so police can actually go out and prosecute if there's to be found some wrongdoings happen. The second one, which is the PC-4, brings in a whole new avenue to it. Do you want me to do them separate, or can I do them separate? Okay. All right, so I'll just, I'll move the amendments in PC-2.
The motion is an amendment to Bill number 102 as presented in change sheet CWHB PC2. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is defeated. Recognize the honourable member for Argyle.
And finally, because, Madam Chair, we too did present these to the government for consideration in law amendments, but we do feel that they are valuable additions and changes to the bill to make it stronger, not only to make it better, but it's things that we did hear from the presenters at LAC, the meetings that we have all been to as members of this House, and hearing the horrible instances of bullying, cyberbullying that happens in our communities that, of course, some of them unfortunately have resulted in suicides in our province. And Madam Chair, these are all unacceptable to us. So what was lacking, what we found in this bill, was the issue of cyberbullying. So what I find before us in PC-4 is a number of changes and additions which define cyberbullying in law and makes it an offense to do so. So, Madam Chair, I move the change sheet PC-4.
Motion is for an amendment to Bill number 102 as presented in change sheet CWHB PC-4. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is defeated. Shall the remaining clauses carry? Carried. Shall the title carry? Carried. Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Chair, as the committee do now rise and report progress.
The motion is carried. The committee will now rise and report its progress to the House. Order, please. The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on Bills reports.
That the Committee of the Whole has met and considered the following bills. Bills 102, 119, and 127 without amendments. Bill 107, which was reported with certain amendments by the Committee on Law Amendments to the Committee of the Whole without further amendments. And the Chairman has been instructed to recommend these bills to the favorable consideration of the House.
Thank you. Ordered that these bills be read for a third time on a future day. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, could you please call government bills for second reading?
Government bills for second reading.
Madam Speaker, could you please call Bill 143, Importation of Wine for Personal Use Act?
I now call Bill number 143, the Importation of Wine for Personal Use Act. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker. Thank you. I'm very pleased to rise today to speak on second reading about a bill that I introduced yesterday. This bill, Madam Speaker, is an amendment to the Nova Scotia Liquor Control Act. It is a bill entitled the Importation of Wine for Personal Use Act, and it will allow me to make regulations that, when adopted, will allow Nova Scotian wine consumers the ability to directly import Canadian wine into our province for personal use. So I will now move that Bill number 143 be read a second time. You can see the panic look on the clerks' faces. I was going to do that. The proposed amendments stem from a decision made in June by the federal government to lift a prohibition on the individual importation of wine. And I think members of the House would all have remembered when this bill was going through the federal Parliament. It was one of those very rare occasions in the federal House of Commons where there was all-party support. So I'm looking forward to the same collegiality on this particular bill. I'm sure that all members of this legislative assembly will be very much in favor of lifting any prohibition on the individual importation of wine, because not only is it good for wine lovers, consumers in our province, but in particular, this will be a very good thing for our wine industry. Madam Speaker, these changes are a great first step, but every province in Canada has its own liquor control laws and regime that will be required to change in order to allow wine to flow freely across provincial boundaries, no pun intended. At this point, British Columbia and Manitoba are the only other two provinces that allow for importation of wine for individual use. And so I'm pleased that Nova Scotia yesterday took the initiative to be the next province to respond to the federal changes. And as I indicated, those who enjoy wine were very pleased to hear about the positive changes to Nova Scotia's liquor laws. And I've heard nothing but positive support for this initiative since I introduced it yesterday. But even before the bill was introduced yesterday, I've had many comments and letters in response to my comments publicly earlier when the federal legislation had passed. Madam Speaker, I think you probably are aware, like other members of the House, that we have a lovely wine industry here in Nova Scotia. It's small, but it's mighty. It consists of 18 small wineries in various parts of our province, along the South Shore, in the Annapolis Valley, and elsewhere, and they produce excellent wine. And they have thousands of visitors each year who visit their wineries and enjoy what is produced here in Nova Scotia. Sales of Nova Scotia wines have grown to $13.3 million in 2011, which is a 65% increase from 2001. Just in 10 years, the industry has grown quite significantly. And Nova Scotia wineries generated $34.8 million in tourism revenues in 2010, including approximately 55,000 overnight visitors, tourists. This is a success story that we should be very proud of, and we should take measures to support and encourage in terms of the growth and the potential of this particular industry. We have a great wine industry in Nova Scotia, and it certainly needs to be recognized, promoted, and supported. And I'm proud to say that that's what this legislation is about, and that is what this government is doing with respect to this industry. The industry themselves welcomed the changes to the federal liquor laws, and they are very hopeful that other provinces will continue to adjust their laws to allow for cross-border shipping in the future so that tourists can order their favorite Nova Scotia wines once they get home. And Canadians who have never set foot on our vineyards can also order our wine. At the bill briefing I hosted yesterday, I was joined by several of our winery operators who reinforced this point. Tim Ramey of Belomedon Estate Winery in Minas Basin said, and I quote, "Ordering wine to be delivered to your home when visiting someplace is a wonderful addition to the cultural experience." I have been in consultation, Madam Speaker, with our province's wine industry for months to hear their thoughts toward changes to our Liquor Control Act, and they could not be more supportive. And as I said, I've received a lot of appreciation from the industry and praise for helping move Nova Scotia's wine industry forward. Wineries here are hopeful that other provinces will follow the lead of British Columbia, Manitoba, and ourselves. When other provinces begin to remove their provincial barriers, there will be a lot of growth potential for our already fast-growing wine industry. And I will be writing to my counterparts in the other provinces, Madam Speaker, encouraging them to move forward with changes to their respective acts. Taxes will be applied to purchases at the point of sale at the tax rate of the province wine is being purchased in. Madam Speaker, our announcement yesterday made headlines in British Columbia, in Manitoba, and in Ontario. In Ontario, wine experts were quoted saying that Nova Scotia's move to allow wine imports could help nudge their province in the same direction. Ontario's MPP Rob Milligan said, and I quote, "We're going to introduce legislation of a similar nature so we can move forward. Anytime there are interprovincial barriers taken down, that's a good thing." And Madam Speaker, I couldn't agree more. As Jerry McConnell from Benjamin Bridge in Wolfville said yesterday, and I quote, "We currently have a potential market of about 1 million people in this province, and we'll soon see this potential market increase to about 30 million people across Canada. This is truly a huge development for our industry." Mr. Speaker, our wine sector has provided us with significant support on this bill, and I'd like to thank them for that. I am anxious to see other provinces follow our lead and witness the great growth opportunities for our industry. For now, this means more choice for Nova Scotians who want to experience wine from other great winemaking regions throughout our country. This is an exciting time for wine consumers, as the doors will soon be open to products we've never had the opportunity to purchase in our province before. Madam Speaker, when the decision to remove federal barriers to the importation of intoxicating liquors act via Bill C-311 was made, as I indicated, all federal parties were in support. I speak for both myself and for our province's wine industry and consumers when I say I would love to see our own amendments receive the same level of support from the provincial parties represented in our House of Assembly. So, Madam Speaker, I would encourage all members to it's a little too early to raise a glass, perhaps, but certainly I encourage all members, if you haven't had an opportunity to sample the excellent wines throughout our province in our small wineries, I would encourage you to do so. They have been winning awards not only nationally, but I'm so proud that they win international awards and recognition. And it is an industry that is on the move, and certainly this initiative is a support to that industry, moving them forward right up there with the great wines of the wine-producing regions of the world, Madam Speaker. So with that, I would like to thank you, and I will move second reading for Bill 143, the Importation of Wine for Personal Use Act.
I would like to remind the Honourable Minister that there would be a requirement to table the documents which you quoted from. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I'm pleased today to speak on second reading for Bill number 143, which is an act that revises the statutes of the Liquor Control Act. And as the Minister has said, this will allow for the importation of wine for personal use from other provinces. And now, because of the federal government's move, it is now going to be allowed federally that liquor can pass between provinces and be transported, which it previously was not. And I know the Minister has made called on us as a group. I won't say it was an appeal to us all, but asked us all to support this in a warm and collegial way. And I don't think there's anybody in the legislature would think that this was a wrong-headed move. It is in fact the right thing to do. I think there's a demand. The public has been wanting this. People who enjoy wine are seeing it as a hobby and as something they like to explore and try. It's part of cultural tourism. It's part of our experience going to other places, and we hope that people who travel to Nova Scotia will have the same opportunity to take home with them the products that are coming from what I learned today are 18 small wineries here in the province. It's certainly, even not knowing the number, I certainly knew that there's been an expansion of wineries in the province, and that the tours to the valley and the day tours that people even from Halifax go down and enjoy are really creating quite a lot of excitement in the province and for tourism. And I think it's terrific. I think that we're seeing, not only more wine production, but wines that are winning national and international awards. And that's very exciting for us as well. The Minister referred to an increase of 65% in the production or the value of our wines produced in Nova Scotia in just a 10-year period. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have a few other industries that are doing the same thing, because that is a success story. story, and we have to celebrate the successes that we have in this province and try and nurture their growth. And this step, which is in all, you know, in all measure a fairly small step to take, because we're following what the federal government has outlined in their act in June of this year, in June 2012, when they paved the way for us to lift the prohibition on wine and alcohol transportation. And I think that it's important that we are one of the first. I often stand in the House, Madam Speaker, and lament the fact that we are slow to respond to changes, either cultural or you know, national changes in demand or in business practice. We tend to often be slow to adopt. And I am pleased to see we're one of the first provinces in the country to take this action and bring this bill forward. And so for that, I'm very pleased. I'm glad the Minister of Finance saw fit to do so. But Madam Speaker, while I'm speaking on the goodness of this bill, I think it's important that we note that the Liquor Control Act, which this is an amendment to, really could use with some other amendments that have been raised and discussed and in fact talked at quite some length in this House. And the government has not chosen, or at least to date has not chosen, to move forward on other suggested amendments. And one of those in particular, Madam Speaker, would be the amendment to make it legal for consumers to mix up and brew their own wine and beer in stores here in Nova Scotia. That we have stores that sell the kits that allow for the production of making your own batches of wine and beer. In fact, those stores provide an opportunity for our local wineries as well, because they can sell their concentrate to those stores for people to make their own wine and do that, you know, either in your home or ideally in the store where you bought the kit. But Madam Speaker, the Department of Finance last year, or the Minister of Finance, brought in a bill that would almost throw a wet blanket on the idea of doing that, because they brought in a bill that gave extraordinary enforcement powers to the NSLC, to our Nova Scotia Liquor Commission. Saying that the Liquor Commission could now crack down basically on any measures, I guess, anything they see in the business community that they feel would be in contravention of the Liquor Control Act. And at the time, which was about this time last year, it was in the fall setting last year, that we talked about this, and I spoke very vigorously against that bill, Madam Speaker, because that was a regressive bill in my opinion. What the current Minister of Finance has proposed today, and what we're on second reading of, Bill 135, that's a very positive thing. That is something that consumers in this country want, that the wine industry wants, that supports an expansion of wine as a hobby and as I guess an interest. But on the flip side, the government's response to the demand or the request that the government allow U-Vins, which again means that on site you yourself can mix up your batch of wine and leave it in the vats in the store so that it actually ages there, and you return to the store and bottle it yourself. That to me is another innovation, another step forward that the government has not turned its attention to or has not seemed willing to move forward on. And Madam Speaker, this has been coming up periodically in the House around the Liquor Control Act, which we're talking about today. It's been raised since 2007, in fact, because there is a demand, and I think it's important to take today as an opportunity while we're speaking to this bill to talk about why people would want that opportunity to experience wine, to become more knowledgeable about wine and enjoy their hobby of enjoying wine, just as this opportunity to export wine between provinces will now offer that opportunity. Because enjoying wine and wine tasting and sort of experiencing different wines from different regions is a real hobby, and people enjoy that. And when you can mix up your own batches of wine and taste wine, it's a way that people actually become more knowledgeable. And if you start by making your own wine, you often, the next step would be to buy wine from the Nova Scotia Liquor Commission, to taste that wine, to compare it to your own, to try different varieties of grapes, to try some from local wineries and so on. And this is just part and parcel of a hobby of enjoying wines. And when the bill was presented to allow that to take place, the previous Conservative government government did not move that bill forward, and the current NDP government has not seen fit to move forward with removing the prohibition on this practice of brewing wine and beer in the stores. And I can't begin to say how much this annoys me, Madam Speaker, because it is such a small thing. It's a small innovation for small business in Nova Scotia. It allows those businesses to offer greater service that is in big demand from the consumers. And there's a number of reasons it's in big demand. One is they've already been transporting their wine across borders, Madam Speaker. They've been brewing their wine at these on-site wine kits or brewing places in other provinces like PEI and New Brunswick. And when the batch is ready and they've bottled their wine, they bring it back to Nova Scotia to their home. And that's because it's not allowed here in Nova Scotia, but it is allowed in our neighboring provinces. You can go to the stores in New Brunswick and PEI and brew your own wine on the premise and go back and bottle it and bring it home to Nova Scotia. The part that was illegal before was the transporting of it back home. And people were either unaware of that or they chose to disregard the fact that they shouldn't have been transporting their wine across the borders. Now, luckily, that will be legal. We won't have to worry about that in future. They can legally go to New Brunswick and brew their own wine or PEI if they want to come home on the ferry and bring it back without contravening any laws. But the regressive part and the lamentable part is that here in Nova Scotia, the government hasn't seen fit to move forward into this 21st century and to show that they are willing to allow this business practice. And why do people want it, Madam Speaker? Why do they want this? Number one is, in my riding particularly, a lot of people live in apartments and condominiums, and they don't have space in their house to set up that big vat full of the wine or beer while it's brewing. They can't leave on a shelf or it would take up their whole kitchen. So they don't have that space as you would in a home where you have a basement or a corner where this can be left for a month or 6 weeks. And so space is a problem if you're living in an apartment or a condominium. And I think then that makes the fact that we can't brew it in a store a sort of discrimination against people who live in smaller homes or in apartments. Secondly, Madam Speaker, we have a lot of older people in this province, and we have a lot of women that can't lift and lug those big vats around when they're filled. They're very heavy. And so as people age, or if you're not strong enough, I don't think I could handle it, to be honest. I'd have to go into training. So it makes a lot of sense that you'd be in a store where there are shelves and you could actually, it's all set up for filling the vats and leaving them there. It's just a huge convenience to women or to older people. And so I think that's another reason why the demand has been growing, because more women are enjoying wine, and that's just fine. More women are wanting to brew their own and taste it and so on. And this is preventing them from doing so, Madam Speaker. So I think that those two reasons alone are very strong reasons why it should be allowed. And not having it be clearly allowed in Nova Scotia is creating an air of uncertainty for that business. And Madam Speaker, it's interesting that just in the fall, I think it was in September, I'd received a letter from somebody who wanted to buy one of the franchises for these kits of wines that you can sell. And they were uncertain about whether or not to do that. And they wrote me a letter asking, did I have any idea where the government stood on this? Because to them, it made a big difference in the business case if they were able to offer that service of brewing it on their premise or not. If they couldn't, that was a huge hit to the income that they could see in the business. And again, a huge hit to the government taxes too, because the businesses are prepared to do that, to collect HST and to remit taxes to the province of Nova Scotia. Interestingly, Madam Speaker.
Order, please.
Yes.
I would remind the member that this is an opportunity to speak to the principle of the bill. I have allowed some leeway to see if there was a connection that you were bringing forward, but I would ask the member to come back to the bill at hand.
Thank you, Madam
Member of
Speaker.
Halifax Clayton Park.
I'm sure, Madam Speaker, that you've seen some of the connections I talked about. The fact that we don't have the ability to brew on premise here means that people are importing wine illegally across the borders. That's what's been happening, and that's really the biggest connection between the demand for on-site brewing and the passage of this bill number 135. So in fact, it's going to add the prohibition now, or lifting of the prohibition of transportation of liquor between provinces is going to actually help those people who are seeking to brew their own wine and are now going out of province to do it because it's not officially sanctioned here. There is a prohibition here in Nova Scotia against that practice. And so as an offshoot of that, Madam Speaker, I wanted to speak to the benefits of allowing the on-site brewing and the fact that it would be good for the coffers, the financial income of the province. It would create an expansion of small business, create new jobs, and that's actually been demonstrated in the stores that have experimented or tried this in Nova Scotia. And there's a growing demand, and it's putting some pressure on I think on government, and I would hope in a positive light. And we have a new Minister of Finance this year. Last year there was a very regressive bill passed that related to the Liquor Control Act, and that's what we're discussing today, Madam Speaker, amendments to the Liquor Control Act. And we have a new minister, and I'm hoping the new minister will be listening as well. So I'm appealing to the finance minister today, too, to perhaps review this and discuss it with staff. I think the lamentable thing is that under a Conservative government, letters were written as to why this was not going to be allowed, and currently under the NDP government, the same kind of responses are coming out from the government. No change. These letters are drafted by bureaucrats who have not changed their opinion one bit. And Madam Speaker, there's an opportunity for the government of the day, the NDP government, to put their stamp on things and to change things. Don't just write what the previous government wrote. Put your own thoughts together. Obviously, in coming up with Bill number 135, in deciding to be a leader in the country by being one of, well, now we are the third province to bring this bill forward. 135? 143, sorry, 143. I appreciate that. I had the wrong bill in front of me. The bill I was looking at was the one that would permit the operation of businesses that assist others in making wine, beer, or cider. So you know, Madam Speaker, you've asked me to speak to the bill at hand, which is 143. But in bringing this forward, we are showing some leadership in this province. We're not being the laggards that is the norm for Nova Scotia adoption of new ideas. We're actually stepping forward, and I think that's very a good thing to see. I'm glad to see that other provinces wrote about it, that it appeared in the press that Nova Scotia was doing something positive. Only last fall, the National Post had an article about how regressive it was that we did not allow the brewing of wine and beer in our stores here in Nova Scotia, where it is allowed in Ontario, BC, New Brunswick, PEI, and other places. And they thought that that was a very lamentable thing. So I'm glad to see that there's a more positive piece of media that's recent following the move and the introduction yesterday of Bill 143. So the minister can take pride in that, but I think that she would be quite surprised to see the article that was written last fall in the National Post. And Madam Speaker, I would be happy to get a copy of that and make it available to her, because maybe in reading that she might reconsider and look at how Bill 143 is actually paving the way for allowing stores to brew on premise here, because it is a step forward to support the industry. I note, Madam Speaker, that in her comments the minister said that this Bill 143 is good for wine lovers and it's good for our industry. Those are exactly the words the minister chose. Good for wine lovers and good for our industry, our wine industry here in Nova Scotia. And by the very same token, Madam Speaker, I would say that allowing U-Vins in our province, allowing people to make their own wine in a store, is also very good news for wine lovers and would be very good news for small business that are engaged in that line of business. And it creates income for the province, because right now when you sell these kits in the store, Madam Speaker, there is no HST paid because it's considered a food product. So it doesn't have HST on it when they sell that. It does, though, when it's brewed on premise. Then there is HST revenue to the province of Nova Scotia. So it's a win-win-win situation. And Bill 143 paves the way to really review and I think expand the changes you're making to the Liquor Control Act. It's a perfect opportunity to review that, and I would hope that this might just be the spark that would allow that to happen, because I'm sure every member of this House would agree, Madam Speaker, that it is really silly that we have forced Nova Scotians to go out of province to our nearest neighbours, PEI and New Brunswick, where they brew their wine in a store and then they go back and bring it across the border, which has been illegal. So we've made law-abiding, good Nova Scotians, in fact, put them in a position where they've gone elsewhere and brought their wine back against the law, because it had been against the law to transport that across the border. Now we are changing that with the introduction of Bill 143, which I'm sure will receive support from all sides of the House. I'm pretty sure. I can't see a downside to Bill 143, quite frankly. There is no reason. We're not protecting the people. We're not decreasing risk to the public or in any way helping by prohibiting the transportation of wine across provincial borders. I think that we need to move to freer trade in a lot of ways between our provinces, and this is one way, one very small step we can take to do that. But while we're trying to bring ourselves into the 21st century, I would call on the minister and on the government to review why there is such a strong aversion to moving forward with allowing a store to brew on premise. You know, Madam Speaker, when the NDP were in opposition, there was a lot of Yes, Madam Speaker.
Again, I would remind the member to speak to the principle of the bill. I've allowed a lot of lenience on your interpretation of connecting the two, but you're now repeating yourself. I would ask you to go back to the bill.
Speaker. Thanks, Madam Speaker. This is the only bill really that's, there's not many bills on our docket this afternoon, so I thought I might be allowed the latitude to repeat myself, as it often happens in this House. But I do understand why we might not want to. I do understand. Perhaps at 2:50 we might be in a hurry this afternoon to hear some speeches from the throne, replies, or some other compelling business. But I can tell you this is a really important issue for the wineries of our province. They're looking forward to this bill passing second reading, going to law amendments, becoming law in Nova Scotia so that they can begin to expand their sales. As the minister said, going from just the small pool of 1 million people in Nova Scotia to being able to sell to Canadians right across the country. And by the same token, as you move forward, I would just call on the government to please reassess your approach to other changes to the Liquor Control Act, which are much needed in this province. And it's an opportunity for the minister to put her mark on a department that needs some shaking up when it comes to the Liquor Control Act. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I look forward to seeing this go to law amendments.
I recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to take a few minutes this afternoon to speak to Bill number 143. I certainly will stand here in favor of this bill, given that a couple of weeks ago, I think now probably, I introduced a bill very similar, even in title, to this one, and it's good to see this bill before the House. I have, I guess, not been a person that the minister spoke, I should say, the minister spoke about the number of people that do enjoy a glass of wine. I think that it's quite a few given the sales and how good the wine industry is in this province. I'm not one of those folks that care for a taste of wine, but that may be just generally because I haven't found one yet that's that I like, Madam Speaker. And but anyway, you never know. I'm getting a few offers here anyway, Madam Speaker. But I should say, in all seriousness, this is a very good industry, one that we know is strong in the province, which is good to see. It's nice to see it growing. I guess, pardon the pun there as well. But I have the pleasure of having a couple of wineries in my constituency. St. Famille Winery in Falmouth, which has been there for quite a number of years. And one of the ministers saying he was there a couple of weeks ago. I've been there many times myself, Madam Speaker, and they do a great business there, and they've just added quite a large expansion on for shipping and packing and storage there for throughout the course of the year, which is nice to see, and it speaks to the success that they are having. One of the important pieces to this industry in the province is how they market themselves as well, as we all know. And I speak to that because some of you that may know the Avondale Sky Winery in Avondale is quite famous for having been once upon a time an old church that was floated up the river and put upon the hill where it now sits. The Walton Church, thank you, Minister. You're correct, it was, and floated up the river and put quite an ordeal, actually, to down the bay, he says. Floated down the bay, down the river to Avondale, where it was put on the hill where it now resides, and added on to and turned into a beautiful building, and added on to and turned into that, and it's quite unique to go into that place. They've left a lot of the aspects of the church actually intact, Madam Speaker, and to see that as a winery and thriving there is very nice, because they get a lot of visitors, their sales are good, and this bill will only help enhance what we already have in place. And those are just a couple of examples. We also have the growers that support those wineries. They don't just do those themselves, Madam Speaker. There are other growers independent from the winery who do help with the grapes and stuff that are grown and transported to these wineries. And I've had the pleasure, actually, a couple of times over the last few years, Tony and Susan Duke, who have quite a big vineyard, actually, through the men's club in our church, actually go and cut the grapes when they're ready, and then they ship them to St. Famille, I believe, and maybe others to be processed. So that's just another example of what's going on in our own community there in Hants West, and I'm sure that there are others who are, pardon me, who are growing. I also know throughout the valley, even just a little farther down the valley, Madam Speaker, that there are a number of wineries, again, that throughout Kings South, Kings North, and onward, and around the provinces, we've heard the minister speak to. There are a lot of wineries, and that this industry is something that is doing very, very well, and we should be thankful for that. And it's nice to see this opportunity come to light here today in the bill before the House, and I know this will pass through. I'm quite sure unanimously being supported, as the federal bill was, which was the right thing to do. And as more provinces sign on, certainly it becomes easier for that industry to continue to expand and to grow, and we look forward to that. So with those few words, Madam Speaker, I will thank you for the opportunity, and again thank the Minister, and take my seat.
Recognize the honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm very happy to rise this afternoon to say a few words myself about Bill 143, the Importation of Wine for Personal Use Act. Although I must say that any time that I stand up to talk about the benefits of alcohol, I do so with maybe a sense of irony. I spent 10 years of my professional life before I was elected, mostly as the manager for addiction services with Annapolis Valley Health, and so I know something about alcohol from a number of perspectives. And I have to say, too, that my grandmother, if people do roll in their graves, probably would be doing that today if she heard me rise to speak about the benefits of alcohol. She was a good Baptist. She was also a very active member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And when I was growing up in Somerset, in the spare bedroom of my country farmhouse, one of the prominent pictures on the wall was a large portrait of Frances Willard, a suffragette who was also the founder of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and a very powerful American woman who led the way in many regards. And my grandmother was so passionate about these issues that she spent a good deal of her life going to schools throughout Kings County to give lectures on the evils of drink. So I know that she wouldn't necessarily approve of what I would like to say today, but I do think while I'm fully in favor of this act, I think it's a positive move forward. Nothing should help us forget that along with those powerful benefits of alcohol and the value of social use, there are also a great deal of harms, and I think the responsible consideration of policy is important in that. And as I listened to the member for Halifax Clayton Park, I thought that maybe in some of her remarks she wasn't paying full attention to that other side of things. But I think I do want to stay focused on Bill 143, and I think, the fact is that when my grandmother was making those presentations in Kings County schools to young students, she wouldn't have imagined, I wouldn't have imagined, probably none of us in this room would have imagined who are old enough to remember that time, that we wouldn't have thought about Nova Scotia's potential for growing grapes and for making award-winning wines. When I was growing up in Kings County, there were no vineyards to see and no wineries to explore. And so there's been a certain change that's occurred in our province. And I'm very happy that one of the results of that activity is it's been a draw for people around the world. I know the King's Regional Development Authority prepared an award-winning website actually a few years back to help promote the wine industry in the world, and got hits from every continent, from people who wanted to know more about what was happening in this whole industry. So it helps draw attention to Nova Scotia. And I recall a couple of years ago meeting an investor from Toronto who has planted a vineyard in Port Williams, and I asked him how he'd happened to buy some land in this part of the world. And he said that he obviously had deep enough pockets to set up a business like this, but he said that, for many years he had had a dream of owning a vineyard, and he had always imagined that he would do that probably in southern France, because that's where he thought probably you could grow, kind of maybe make the best investment. So because of that interest of his, he was Googling possible wineries for sale, and he came upon a winery in Bear River that at that point was for sale, and thought, I didn't know there were any vineyards or wineries in Nova Scotia. And so he came down to Nova Scotia to have a look, and all it took was a couple of days of looking around the Annapolis Valley to decide this was a place to put his money. He was sold on the idea, and now he's growing grapes, and he's planning a winery that will have a future here and will add to the work that's going on in Nova Scotia. The function, Madam Speaker, of Bill 143 is to allow Nova Scotians to import wines that are 100% locally produced and grown in Canada into our province. And I think this is a really important step forward. I know that the minister quoted Jerry McConnell earlier, and I had noticed today in the Halifax Chronicle Herald that Jerry McConnell was who worked for Benjamin Bridge Vineyards. He said, this is truly a huge development for our industry. And I think we need to look at it this way. It's a short bill, but a huge step forward. And of course, Madam Speaker, this is a step in the process. This is a legislation that follows some federal legislation that opens the way for moving wines across borders. But it does require reciprocal agreements in other provinces. We've had some development already in the country because British Columbia and Manitoba have both passed similar legislation. But we need other provinces to follow, and I think there's every likelihood to believe that work will unfold. So I think this is definitely a step in the right direction. It's another way to help what is clearly a growing industry and a bright spot in our provincial economy. And of course, Madam Speaker, the bright spot, the economic bright spot, is not just about growing grapes and making wine. It's also about tourism. Maybe it's particularly about tourism and the opportunity for people both in the province and outside the province to connect with products that are grown in what's a very beautiful part of the world. Tourists who come here will, as this process moves forward, be able to maybe carry a little bit of Nova Scotia home with them. Perhaps we can imagine the day when people are thinking about a gift or a Christmas present or an ability to support their employees, that they'll buy a case of wine and have it shipped to Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal to help remind themselves and their employees to give them a taste of Nova Scotia in another part of the world. And maybe, Madam Speaker, the ability to take these wines to other parts of Canada will encourage conversations in living rooms and dining rooms, not only about the quality of the wine, but where it came from. And we need that kind of conversation, Madam Speaker, because we need more people to know about Nova Scotia, to know not only what a wonderful place this is, but about the quality of the things that we know and the things that we can build and make, because that's what will help grow our economy, Madam Speaker, and that's what will give us a great deal more confidence. Provincial wineries, Madam Speaker, are already important. They helped generate in 2010 $34.8 million in tourism revenue alone. I think that's a significant number, Madam Speaker. And they helped encourage about 55,000 overnight tourist stays. So a very important part of our rural tourism economy. And the sales of Nova Scotia wines in 2011, last year, Madam Speaker, were, I understand, $13.3 million. That is actually an amazing 65% increase in dollar sales over 2011. I would like to mention too, Madam Speaker, as I comment on Bill 143, that the possibility of building this industry and of connecting it with other parts of the country has been possible in part because of research work that's been done at the Kentville Agricultural Research Centre. Scientists in that location have been doing a great deal of work to help understand how maybe traditional grapes can grow in this environment, how new varieties of grapes can do better in our climate, and how we can maybe match those cultivars with the changing climate in Nova Scotia, which is now a little warmer than it was when I was a kid growing up here. And Acadia University, Madam Speaker, has also been a very important part of the development of our winery and grape growing industry. We're doing a great deal of work now with the industry to help them think about how to design and market their products more effectively here and eventually across Canada and around the world. As has been mentioned, Madam Speaker, there are in Nova Scotia at this moment 18 wineries. An amazing number. And I'd just like to mention a few of them to illustrate that Bill 143 is not simply about a small thing, but it's about different parts of our province. But I'd like to highlight particularly, because I represent folks in the Annapolis Valley, some of the wineries that are there. Some of these have been mentioned, but some haven't. One of the places that has wineries is the Gaspereau Valley, an absolute jewel of a place. If somebody in this room has not been through the Gaspereau Valley at some point, it's worth a little detour at any time of the year. But there are several now wineries in the Gaspereau Valley. Lackady Vineyards is one of those. Benjamin Bridge is in the Gaspereau Valley. And there is also a vineyard called Gaspereau Vineyards. All of those now exist in the Gaspereau Valley, and I think give people an opportunity to have a look at them and maybe to stop and do some other things while they're there. One of the things that's particularly interesting to do in the summertime, if you're in the Gaspereau Valley, is to do a little bit of tubing. And nothing might be more interesting than to go tubing and then have a glass of wine at maybe Benjamin Bridge. The winery I mentioned earlier in Bear River is called the Annapolis Highlands Vineyards, and it shows that we can grow wine in a more westerly part of the valley. The member for Hance West has mentioned the Avondale Sky Winery. I guess my grandmother wouldn't be so happy to know that we're now selling wine out of a former church. But the ambiance in that building is truly amazing, and I think the story of how that old church has been put to some new use is an interesting and, I think, part of the cultural evolution of Nova Scotia. There's only one winery at this moment that's actually up and running, which is Blomidon Estate Winery in Canning. It's on the Habitat Road between the wonderful small village of Canning and the jewel of a community called Kingsport on the Minas Basin. And it has some interesting wine because it actually grows. Its grapes are growing down to the edge of the Minas Basin, and the quality of that wine is related not only to the land, also to the sea. But we can look beyond that to Grand Pré, one of the birthplaces of our province, to the Domaine de Grand Pré, which has been probably one of the earliest vineyards in Nova Scotia. And the people who founded that vineyard and winery foresaw the possibility that other people couldn't see, and actually started the work that's has spread across the province. I neglected to mention, as I've been talking about these things, the Luckett Vineyard in Gaspereau Valley, one of the newer ones, but people in this house and others might recognize that the vineyard is that vineyard is owned by Pete Luckett, whose fame spreads to other parts of the industry. But I mention these things, Madam Speaker, not just to name the vineyards, but to show the importance of Bill 143 in connecting Nova Scotia with a growing and burgeoning part of our economy to other parts of the world. And I think understanding the value of Bill 143 is not just about interprovincial trade. It's very much, Madam Speaker, about being able to connect the kind of work that's being done in particular beautiful locations with the importance of trade. So, Madam Speaker, those are the things I particularly wanted to say. But I do want to add, one other element, I guess, in this, that what I'm noticing as I watch the growing interest in the wineries and vineyards, the growing interest in tourism as it's related to wineries and vineyards, is that people are interested in coming to Nova Scotia to have a look at certain things. And one of the things they can have a look at are the vineyards and wineries that we have. They can use tours to do that. Several businesses have begun to evolve, to take advantage of that opportunity. And while they do that, Madam Speaker, it means that when people are staying overnight, they might be staying in one of our beds and breakfast. They might be visiting a provincial park. They might be doing a little bit of other shopping. And certainly that experience is going to help them carry, as I've already said, the message of Nova Scotia to other parts of the world. And we need that, I think, Madam Speaker, more than most other things. We need the world to know about Nova Scotia. We need to know that Nova Scotia is seen by the world so that we can see ourselves in a more confident light, and we can build the confidence to build our economy and our culture in a way that can create a higher level of prosperity for everyone in this province. So I would like to end by just thanking again the Minister of Finance for bringing this small but important bill forward, and for opening the door to a better future, not only for the winery and vineyard industry, but as another step in building a better future for Nova Scotia. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Recognize the Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I would like to stand here today to speak a few words on the bill, the importation of wine for personal use. It goes without saying that many people here in this House know how proud I am to be the MLA for King South. And King South is one of the areas in the Annapolis Valley that the member from Kings North mentioned. We have a wonderful area in the Annapolis Valley that has most of the wineries that are now in the province of Nova Scotia. I would like to start my comments by speaking about the comments from the member from Hants West when he said that he didn't care for wine. And actually what the member should do is actually take some time at one of our wineries, and they're very good at educating folks to the different kinds of wine and allowing them to taste samples and talking about how the wine is, the grape that's used and how it's produced. And interestingly enough, some people that don't care for wine will actually find one of the wines that they actually will like very much, because there's quite a variety of wines now produced in our province. The honourable member from Kings North made a comment about his dear grandmother, who I know would be concerned about what we're talking here today, but I just want to stress that when we're talking about wine, we're not talking about spirits in its purest form. What we're talking about when we talk about wine, we're talking about food. Because actually, when you look at wine, wine is food for our table. It is meant to be enjoyed with food, and it's meant to be enjoyed in small amounts with friends. I have to say that I'm very, very proud of the work that's being done at the at Grand Pre. And the owner at Grand Pre, Hans-Peter Stutz, is a fine gentleman who has brought, he's awesome, beyond awesome. And I could go on about the work that not only he has done for his own winery, but how he has supported all of the wineries in the province. But Hans-Peter and I have had this conversation about the importation of wine over the last number of years. And I know that Hans-Peter Stutz is very proud of our Minister of Finance moving this as quickly as she did once the federal government paved the way that we can do this. This bill is about us bringing wine in, but the most important component of this is that now that people around Canada can now enjoy our Nova Scotia wine. This gives the ability for our wine to go out into other parts of the world now, for them to know the fine wine that Nova Scotia is actually now producing. At the winery of Grand Pre, help me here, the domain? Anyway, the winery at Grand Pre. Grand Pre Winery started quite a few years ago, and I remember at the time, all of us in the Annapolis Valley kind of looked at each other going, a winery growing grapes? We're going to make wine in the Annapolis Valley? But the person that did that back at that time period was really quite brave to start the industry. Unfortunately, the first attempts at that winery were not successful. But when Hans-Peter Stutz came to our country and recognized that it was the wrong grape that was growing, and he actually planted the grape that was going to grow in our soil that matched our climate. That's when the magic happened. Hans-Peter has the grapes that are now growing in the Annapolis Valley. You can't grow certain grapes in the Annapolis Valley. We grow what is best for the wines that we're making. I don't know if members here today know that the restaurant that is at the winery is one of the top wine restaurants of the world. 2 years ago, it was recognized as one of the places for a destination for one of the best wine restaurants. Hans-Peter Stutz has not only grown, as I said, his industry, his winery and his restaurant. He has been supportive and a mentor to many of our other wineries in the Annapolis Valley and around Nova Scotia. He feels very strongly that working together makes a better industry. Now, I think that we're all very well aware of this in the Annapolis Valley, and the member from Kings North has actually seen the results of what's happening in the valley over the summer. Wolfville has put, yes, Wolfville decided through their president of their business association, Suzanne Balcom, to hire a bus, and they called it the Wolfville, I think it's the Magic Wine Bus. They brought it on for a number of weekends. And what this was, a double-decker bus that actually took you on a tour. I think there were 5 wineries. I think they went to Grand Pre, Murray, I know that they went to the Gaspereau Winery, up to Pete Luckett's, and there might have been one more. I know they didn't make it all the way out to Benjamin Bridge, but they went to 5 wineries, and you could get on and off of the bus throughout the full day. And for $10, you had from one winery to another the whole day. Tasting wines, and the wineries were able to not only provide samples, but the education around what people were tasting, smelling, and how to taste wine. It was so busy downtown, and I'm going to say this for one of our honourable members, Wolfville. It was so busy in Wolfville that we had people jams. We didn't worry about the traffic, but there were so many people. There were so many people coming to the Valley to taste our wines. Now, when they came to the Valley to taste their wines, now they can actually purchase wines to take home with them that they can now share with their friends in other parts of Canada. Because before, as we know, it was illegal to move wine from one province to another. So because of the Importation of Wine for Personal Use Act, people that are coming from the Valley can now share our wine all across Canada. So I wanted to also say that now one of the things that many people might not know, that we had Jason Priestley came to the Annapolis Valley for a visit because of the wines. He had heard about them, and he was so impressed with the wines in the Annapolis Valley that he decided to stay for a little while and brought a film production. And so Call Me Fitz was the name of the that film industry, that filming actually was created because of the wine industry, because he recognized the wine and the great food that we have. So I just want to thank the Minister of Finance very much for now being, for us in Nova Scotia to be able to share the gem that we have of our excellent wine in all areas of Canada. Now I have to qualify that in the provinces that also allow this, because not all provinces have the same bill that they're moving forward. We hope they will soon. So I just want to close my remarks, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to say how proud I am to be the MLA of an area that has such great wines and great food. So thank you very much.
I'm to recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance. It will be to close debate.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank all of the members for their intervention. It was very interesting. And Madam Speaker, I apologize to you. There is an article from which those quotes were taken, so I will table that that article so that it will be on the record. And with that, I will close debate for second reading.
The motion is for second reading of Bill number 143, the Importation of Wine for Personal Use Act. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 143, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act, to allow the importation of wine for personal use.
Ordered that Bill number 143 be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That concludes the government's business for today. We wish the House to now rise to meet from the hours of 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And after the daily routine, the business of the House will be bills for second reading 142, 144, 147, private and local bills for second reading 146, and time allots bills for third reading 102, 107, 119, and 127. And if time permits, again, Madam Speaker, address and reply. So I wish the House to now rise to meet from the hours of 9 a.m. to, I'm just dragging it out here, 140, Madam Speaker, 140, not 142, 140 Yes, Mr. Speaker. The transgender persons, that's 140. So with that, Madam Speaker, I ask you now rise and the House to meet tomorrow at 9 to 3 p.m. For the third.
The motion is that the House does now rise to meet again tomorrow, Friday, November the 23rd, between the hours of 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. It's now the moment of interruption, and I now call under Rule 5.5, as read earlier today, a resolution put forward by the Honourable Member for Colchester North. And it reads, therefore, be it resolved that this NDP government heed their own words while in opposition when they condemned corporate welfare, stop handling over hundreds of millions of dollars to large corporations who lay off Nova Scotians, and get back to the fundamentals of economic development in Nova Scotia. Recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Member for Bedford Birch Cove is blonde, and I'm not blonde. But we do get mixed up for some reason with each other. So do you find that women politicians are often mixed up with each other? I don't know why that is, but Madam Speaker, on another point, in elections, I have gone door to door and been completely mistaken for another candidate that happens to be female, but doesn't look a bit like me. And I see that this may strike a chord with some other members of the House, but it's just a funny thing. I don't think we do the same thing with men when it comes to mixing up men. But in one campaign, they were saying to me, oh, I thought you had 4 children. And I said, no, this isn't the picture of my family. It's 2 children. And it's just kind of amazing. But, Madam Speaker, the point of my late debate tonight is not nearly so pleasant as to share our experiences as women in politics and women in the legislature, because today my job is to rise as a member of the Liberal Party and speak about really about corporate welfare and about the corporate giveaways that have really made an imprint on the people of Nova Scotia as a legacy of the NDP government. And, Madam Speaker, it's a real surprise for many who supported the NDP government in 2009 to see the direction that the government has taken. And I know that in question period we have heard time after time quotes that have come from earlier times here in this legislature, where members who are currently in the House have, when they were in opposition said one thing, and now that they are part of the NDP government and sitting on the governing side of the House, we are hearing, as people of Nova Scotia, hearing a completely different story. And, Madam Speaker, it's a real surprise for many, and I include myself among those, because I sat in opposition for 6 years. I was in the Liberal side of opposition. The NDP were sitting as official opposition, and I heard the statements and the outrage and the concern that the NDP time and again raised about corporate giveaways, about writing blank checks for business, about pointing out the hypocrisy of supporting big business when other things were being neglected, like social programs, like education, housing, and we can go on, social assistance, and not addressing poverty. Those issues were paramount, and certainly the NDP members, one after another, had spoken against them. Madam Speaker, I only have 10 minutes in late debate, so I don't want to take a long time to go over this, but I've been given many instances of these kind of quotes that were made by other members that now sit in government. And in particular, there was a series of comments made about particularly about the loans given to Scotiabank at one time, where members in the NDP government said, or at the time they were the NDP opposition, were saying, how on earth can you be giving them millions of dollars? And in fact, it was, I think, a $15 million support when this business has hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, billions in fact, and is one of the largest companies in Canada. Now, Madam Speaker, in the new situation that we find ourselves in, we see the NDP completely reversing their stance on corporate welfare. I didn't coin the phrase corporate welfare. That is synonymous with things that the NDP say. They're saying it in Ottawa. They say it in other provinces. They said it in opposition. It is an NDP phrase. And in the meantime, the NDP government, as I say, has become characterized by these large giveaways to big business. And Madam Speaker, I'm sure you know the figures now. It's $590 million that have been given in guarantees, loans, and support and equity stakes in 6 businesses. Just 6 businesses. And out of those 6 businesses, Madam Speaker, a number have gone bankrupt. A couple are you know, uncertain. I don't have the figures exactly of the numbers, but it is definitely led, and this is very important, Madam Speaker, it's led to 1,300 fewer jobs working in those 6 businesses. So we've put millions of dollars in, and we have fewer workers to show for it. Now, there has been largesse in the past, no question. Companies have been given money, but they've been given money when there are guarantees of jobs, and security is actually entrenched into that agreement. You don't give money to companies so they will cut your workforce. That's not how it's done. Madam Speaker, the point of today's discussion really was to look at that was then and this is now, and how greatly the NDP have changed in terms of their stance on really running this province and what they stand for in running this province. And you know, it's just quite amazing to see the changes that have come over that time. We have the finance minister, Madam Speaker, the current finance minister in 2000 saying something. I know the minister may think that's a long time ago, 2000, but every day that I sit here as a member of the Liberal Party, I hear all kinds of allegations and talk about the 1990s, so going back even further. And Madam Speaker, the finance minister in November 24th of 2000 actually made a statement saying that we have, I want to get the whole statement, we have no difficulty as a province, previous governments and this government, she was talking to the Conservative government at the time, have no difficulty giving millions of dollars to profitable companies and corporations as a first priority where people with disabilities are now requiring help. So she was comparing the support for people with disabilities to the millions of dollars going out the door to corporations. So Madam Speaker, you can see that you know, the current finance minister has made a complete about-face on this. I wanted to speak in the few minutes that I have today as well, particularly about the IBM contract, which is, to me, a very, very mistaken choice to give away the expertise and really the core of our financial systems to IBM as a carrot to bring them here to the province. Madam Speaker, we didn't invite tenders to outsource all of our SAP services. We have spent 15 years in this province building up strong services in SAP. We are, I think, the most integrated SAP client, I guess, or provider in, I think, almost in the world, certainly in Canada. We are the best. We, as one province, we chose what has been described as a Cadillac system. And I've sat on public accounts here, Madam Speaker, and I know you have too, listening to stories of cost overruns and the investment we have made into integrating SAP into all of the functions of government. So everything from our driver's licenses, all of our records, our property records, who owns land, where do they own it, what's it valued at, all of our procurement, all of the payments we make for everything that we buy in government goes through SAP. It's an enormous financial database and full of information that's private with the public, that it is private information, Nova Scotians. I'm concerned about that, and I think that's important that we mention it, that by contracting this out, we are losing the control of that information. We're then going to become dependent on a private company to answer questions, to run the system for us, and so on. Madam Speaker, I had something which I'd be happy to table, which actually comes from a little magazine called The Stand, fall of 2012, and it's actually the NSGEU newspaper or little newsletter, and they have an article on the outsourcing of the SAP services, saying it's a quality service we can't afford to lose. They talk a lot about the privacy and the loss of control over private information. And they also talk about their members, 73 out of 110 of the government Department of Finance SAP workers are union members. Now we're talking about that was the government before, the NDP when they were in opposition, and where they are today. And would anybody ever have imagined them taking 100 Nova Scotia government employee union members and throwing them out of the government, taking them off the payroll, and taking away what bothers me, not only the privacy and all the information, but literally millions of dollars of investment that we as a province put in to building up that expertise. That expertise did not appear overnight, Madam Speaker. That expertise was built up painstakingly over 15 years in computer programs, in systems, countless millions in consultants to help our people learn the systems. We have invested, I am sure, well over $100 million to get to where we are today with a first-class system and a solid team of people who can run these systems. And we're now going to jeopardize the whole thing by giving them as a carrot to IBM to locate a centre here in Halifax. Madam Speaker, the cost is according to the minister, neutral by outsourcing these jobs. Again, think about it. The NDP government outsourcing good government jobs, losing control of private information, and not even losing a night's sleep over it. Not any concern whatsoever. Is my time up, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, it is a travesty, and I hope that there'll be an opportunity to debate it further here in the House.
Recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I know we're talking about corporate handouts, and I just thought about talking a little bit today about a gentleman who I read a resolution about earlier today. Mr. Joe Shannon. He's somebody we're very proud of. He lives in Long Point, which is just down the road from me, where I live in Judic. And Mr. Shannon is a tremendous person. He obviously has a gift. Bucking the trend, he quit school, I believe, at the age of 16. Maybe quit isn't the right word. I think he left school at the age of 16. And he started working. And it wasn't long before he impressed people around him. And I'm going to tell the story as best I can, Madam Speaker. I know there's others who could tell it much better. But it wasn't long before he gained the respect of those around him. He started out driving a truck. And of course, today we see all kinds of seaboard transport trucks on the highway. Many of them are B-train trucks with 2 trailers in the back. I believe that company is the largest distributor of bulk liquids in the country, Madam Speaker. So from humble beginnings, but with obviously, as I say, a man who was gifted, made wonderful contribution to the economy of our country, and especially here, as we appreciate here in Nova Scotia. And I'm going to call Joe Joe because that's what we all call him at home. Joe built his businesses from scratch. Over the years, he diversified. I know many people will be familiar with Shanex, with his assisted living homes for seniors. He has real estate, information technology, construction, and of course, transportation, which I've referred to already. So, and I know he's bought up numerous other trucking companies around the country as well. It's surprising, Madam Speaker, because I've known Joe for years and seen him around a lot. It's surprising sometimes when you realize what he's actually done with his life. And I mean, having over 5,000 employees working for him is really amazing. And I know the member from Cape Breton West chuckled today and said that he's created more jobs than the Premier. And I thought that was kind of funny, but it is really on that. And we always talk in government about how we're the ones that create jobs. Madam Speaker, I believe we may be able to create the environment for jobs to be created, but I don't think we really create jobs. It's people like Joe Shannon who create jobs. And if I can tie that back into the debate today, we talk about corporate handouts. Mr. Shannon has built his businesses from scratch, the good old-fashioned way with hard work, attention to detail. If I can use a word my father would use, I suppose he was pretty shrewd over the years, making investments that he was careful to make, ensuring that they made sense and that there was a return on investment. And Madam Speaker, those are the kinds of business people that we want in this province and that really produce results. And so I tip my hat, as the saying goes, to Joe Shannon for that. So, Madam Speaker, as I was saying, I think it's important for government to be focused on building a competitive economy. And I know the members opposite have heard me say this many times, but that includes looking at power rates, looking at our taxation. We've seen both go up for this government. Those are two significant costs for business. And, Madam Speaker, I think when we see government so focused on handouts and trying to connect itself to the jobs created by the handouts, I think that's a real shame, and it's a disappointment for Nova Scotians. There are many people who are upset about these handouts, and I know small businesses frustrated with it. And because they go to work every day, if they don't get these handouts, Madam Speaker, and there becomes the element of fairness. And it raises the question, is this government being fair to them? And Madam Speaker, I don't think it is. And I've been told that by many small businesses that I've spoken with. So we also talk a lot about power rates in this legislature, and I don't often heckle in the chamber, Madam Speaker, but I was heckling the Premier today and asking him to back up his energy statements with numbers, with economics. Because, Madam Speaker, as soon as he presents numbers with his philosophy, Madam Speaker, I think he really knows, which is why he won't table any numbers or any economics behind his philosophy. He knows that his philosophy holds no weight. And I also have to say that I laugh because I know at a fundraising dinner recently, the Premier, to his own flock, talked about the lords of the world economy. And if the lords of the world economy smile upon the world, then maybe they can balance the budget next year. And, Madam Speaker, I had to laugh. It almost made me think they might do some kind of a ritual. Maybe we should all the members should get up and do a dance. And maybe we can appease the lords of the of the world economy, to appease the lords of world economies. So, Madam Speaker, I say that in jest, but it is actually how ridiculous this has become, where the government is actually blaming their ability not to balance the budget on the lords of the world economy. So. Well, and the member says there's no recession. We have been in a recession. We're certainly in a recession in certain parts of this province, Madam Speaker, and I wish the member would realize that his government is contributing to that recession. And I have to say too, Madam Speaker, that we talk about balanced budgets. It's critical in this province that we balance the budget because we don't have a cyclical economy. We don't have an economy like they have in Alberta, where they get a quarter of their revenues from royalties, from oil and gas. If we had that, Madam Speaker, then I could see, if we were in a bust period, that maybe we could go into a deficit, recognizing that we would have a future boom period that could pay for that. But, Madam Speaker, we don't. We don't have a boom period on the horizon, at least certainly not that I'm aware of. And I know there has been some oil and gas announcements lately with Shell and British Petroleum, and thanks to the investment of the previous government, as the members opposite would refer to, we the lot over here. Those investments, Madam Speaker, are the reasons why British Petroleum and Shell are going to be conducting over $2 billion worth of economic activity on our offshore. Madam Speaker, how much time do I have left? 2 minutes. Well, Madam Speaker, it's been a long day for many of us, and I think I've made my points enough for the record today, and I will conclude my remarks with that. Thank you.
Recognize the honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have to begin by saying that I was just hauled out of the Law Amendments Committee. I thought that I would have another 2.5 hours to get some thoughts together, but that's okay. That's okay, Madam Speaker, because in dealing with that crew and that crew over there, I don't think I need very much time for preparation, because I know what we are doing in government, and I know what they did. And I'll tell you, we've had some very good weeks in Nova Scotia in recent times, and we had very few in the past. So I want to begin by talking about what we're supposed to be talking about this afternoon, the disparaging remarks that have been made from the other side of the House in relationship to corporate welfare bums. And those are words that actually came from one of the great federal NDP leaders, David Lewis. David Lewis was the person who coined the term corporate welfare bums. However, those were in the days when conservative and liberal governments were handing out money without any kind of rebate system. Both provincial and federal governments were involved in a system, and what a disservice it is and a misrepresentation it is to David Lewis, because David Lewis actually talked about the good companies as well. He talked about companies with integrity. He actually didn't group everybody as corporate welfare bums. And I believe that there has been a real disservice in this House in the past couple of weeks when we refer on that side of the House to corporate welfare bums. And we in fact are bringing renowned companies to Nova Scotia like IBM and Projects. You know, we have been in government for, I'm just trying to do the math, we have been in government for 180 weeks, a lot of real good weeks. But even the Chronicle Herald referred to the recent week when we came up with 940 jobs in Nova Scotia. The Chronicle Herald referred to that being the best week the government of Nova Scotia has had in its term in office. The best week. We've had 180 good weeks, but we've had a real good week, and it was too good. The news was too good for over there. The news was just too good, because all we heard was attack. You know something? That other side of the House could actually turn saints into sinners. That's the way, and I'm not saying we're saints, but we've been a lot better than the other two parties opposite. So I want to talk about what has happened. In the 1980s, okay, let's just listen for a moment, please. Can you stop the heckling for a moment? Because we came to government with a whole series of messes. And the biggest mess of all was $13 billion worth of debt. $13 billion worth of debt. And three-quarters of that debt can be traced back to the Conservatives and 1/4 of it to the Liberals. $13 billion. You are responsible for over $9 billion worth of debt. And that came from the 1980s when there was no fiscal responsibility. It came at a time when government made their friends rich. That's what happened. Now, I have to say, I have to actually give a bouquet to the Liberals. Because the Liberals actually came up with a situation where the money just wasn't given out to the companies, and some of the companies could take the money and run. The Liberals actually came up with something called a rebate system. So this is what we're involved with today. Now, they didn't do a very good job with that rebate system. They came in with it. They came in with this rebate system, which was actually a good move, because they keep talking about all the money that's being given to companies. And that money is geared today to performance, and they can't seem to get it over there. They cannot seem to get it. They can't get it through their heads. I don't know. I think we need crayons. I think we have to draw a picture for them and actually show them. So, you know, the Liberal rebate system was good, but we have actually turned the poor job that they were doing with it, we have refined it and honed it to become a very good project. So we come in with 940 jobs, two major announcements in the very same week. 940 jobs for Nova Scotians. You know something? There is really something wrong on the other side of the House when we hear Jim Irving actually saying that you as a government were responsible for us getting the shipbuilding procurement contracts. And anyhow, what I want to point out is something that Nova Scotians want. Nova Scotians want good, high-paying, long-term jobs and a growing economy so they can stay and raise their families at home. Our government shares that vision and is working hard to make it a reality. The opposition is misleading Nova Scotians and those interested in establishing or expanding business here. Their constant negativity, this is what really bugs me, is their constant negativity. Their constant negativity hurts the image of our province, and it's not productive. You're not helping Nova Scotia out. You're actually job killers.
Order.
That's what you guys...
Order. I would remind the member that the use of "you" is not permitted in the chamber, and to direct your comments to the Speaker. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I know that. I've been in the House long enough to know that. I just get a bit carried away with that crew over there because they are, in fact, through you, Madam Speaker, I'm allowed to say they have so much negativity that they are hurting the productive approach that we are taking here in Nova Scotia today. Our NDP government is committed to protecting good jobs like we did when we stood with the workers and their families in the Strait area. And I was very proud of the member for Inverness yesterday when he stood up, and we hear so much from the folks in the Liberal Party. We hear so much from them about the money that was spent in the Strait, and the member for Inverness talked about seeing the steam coming out of that plant again and how proud he was of it. That member knows what this government is doing. I was very touched. I was heartened by what he said yesterday. Now, I know I'm running out of time, but I just want to say in closing that our government is committed to bringing those high-paying jobs and long-term jobs and protecting the ones in Inverness and elsewhere, in Richmond County and elsewhere.
Order.
So,
the time allotted for late debate has elapsed. I want to thank all members for participating this afternoon. The House now stands adjourned to meet again tomorrow at 9 a.m. you.